Good afternoon, and welcome to our live discussion about the current state of immigration in the United States. My name is Melissa Montalvo, and I'm a reporter with the Modesto Bee. I'm joined today by an amazing panel. We have some Central Valley-based immigration lawyers, advocates, and policy experts to help us understand the current changes happening under President Donald Trump, as well as the challenges and barriers that immigrants face as they immigrate to the United States. This event is brought to you by La Abeja, our McClatchy reporting team that covers Latino issues here in California. If you heard about this event because of our newsletter, thank you so much for your support and for subscribing. This discussion will be broken up into 3 mini panels. The first one will be joined by some Central Valley-based immigrant advocates, and we'll check in with them to have an understanding of the climate facing immigrants currently here in the Central Valley, given the new administration. Then we'll transition to a conversation with 2 immigration lawyers to understand the barriers, systems, and challenges immigrants face. And then the third section will be led by reporter Eric Galicia, who will break down misinformation and best practices when encountering and sharing information on social media. Before I invite our panelists up, let me invite my colleague, Maria Ortiz Briones, who is a reporter with the Fresno Bee and Vida en el Valle, our sister publication. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you, Melissa.
Now, first up, we have Dr. Jesus Martinez, Executive Director of the Central Valley Immigrant Integration Collaborative. Welcome.
Hello, Melissa and Maria.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Matias Bernal, Development Director with the California Immigrant Policy Center.
Good afternoon, Melissa. Good afternoon, Maria and Jesus.
Well, let's get started. I'll open up the conversation sharing a statistic from the UC Merced Community and Labor Center. According to a recent analysis, more than 1 in 5 Central Valley residents are foreign-born, and of these, more than half are non-citizens. Jesus, can you just explain to us a little bit about the contributions and role that immigrants play in our community?
Well, thank you, Melissa, for the question. And to support the information that is presented by UC Merced, there are also other documents and other studies that have been carried out about the impact and the role of Central Valley immigrants. Now, but I'll begin by pointing out, also adding some additional information that, according to our own research, there are over 900,000 immigrants residing in the Central Valley. And as you pointed out, only a fraction of them are citizens. Others are permanent residents. They may have temporary visas, like U visa, T visa. There may also be DACA recipients. And then there's also a portion of the population that is undocumented. But regardless of the immigration status, what we find is that immigrants, whether they're what we call low-skilled or high-skilled immigrants, they all make very important contributions, not only to the economy, but to the society, to the culture, and to the polity that we have here in the Central Valley. We have many immigrants who participate in our programs who are business owners and are growing and developing their businesses. We have immigrants who are doctors, who are teachers, who are educators, who work in everything that one can imagine. So the Central Valley economy, even though it's agriculturally based, that is the predominant industry, but there are many different contributions and many different roles that immigrants play. They are as important a role in the Central Valley as any other social group. And because of their numbers, the Central Valley economy would not exist as it is without those contributions that I mentioned by immigrants from all walks of life, from many different countries.
Thank you so much.
Jesus, continue with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what are you hearing from the immigrant community, as well as how the new Trump administration has impacted the work that you do here in the Central Valley?
Maria, when CIVIC was created in 2014, The idea was to create an organization that would also promote a model of regional coordination and collaboration. So the work that we do is always in partnership with many different entities, nonprofits, agencies, public sector agencies, private sector entities. So from Trump 1, what we learned is that there were many different policies that were harming the immigrant community, but there were also remedies that could be implemented at that point in time to assist immigrants who were being targeted and whose rights were not being respected. Before the November election, Civic and many other partner organizations were involved in discussions about how to better prepare our organizations and the population that we serve with whatever scenario unfolded after the election. And what we began to see right after the election was obviously a large number of people that were very fearful about the election results and the potential policies that could be implemented by a candidate who during the election had been promising to adopt very harsh policies, which we have been seeing. But to everyone's surprise, though, one of the things that really, I think Lázaro will probably be able to add more to that. What we're also seeing and hearing from colleagues, including attorneys, was that even before Trump arrived to the White House in this second term, there was already an increase in the number of people being detained in the Central Valley. And when the raids took place in Kern County in particular in January, obviously, not only were people arrested and the fear increased, among other things, but what we also found in documents, including the lawsuit that was filed by ACLU about those raids, is that the immigration authorities, CBP, were also carrying out numerous violations of civil rights. So rights of immigrants were not being respected. Naturalized citizens, among others, were being detained. People without any type of criminal issue, which were supposed to be the target population, were not being, were also being detained and deported without any type of legal assistance provided to them or giving them the right to contact an attorney. Many different types of violations.
How about you, Matias? Same question. What have you been hearing and how that change in the administration has changed the work you do?
Locally within the Central Valley, what we saw, as Jesus mentioned, was an increase in demand for immigration legal services for both affirmative and removal defense. This includes families that were trying to adjust their immigration status to become permanent residents, and those who were permanent residents wanting to become U.S. citizens as soon as possible before the inauguration date. Those numbers have only continued to increase within the Valley after the inauguration. And in the first 100 days, we've continued to see a lot of increase for demand for immigration legal services. Within this region, what we're also seeing is that we are getting a lot of requests from other partners to receive Know Your Rights presentations to educate the community about what they can do in the event they were to be encountered by immigration enforcement agencies. And additionally, with partners seeking the same support. What happens if ICE were to come to my place of employment? What is my employer supposed to do? What happens if they come to a school? What is the school supposed to do? Post the election and the inauguration, we also saw a number of executive orders really creating chaos within legal service providers, policy leaders, and others. And the intention of the many executive orders was to undermine the ability of immigrant communities to be resilient by attacking something as unconstitutional as trying to end birthright citizenship, by attacking federal funded programs that have been created by bipartisan support, like those programs funding the representation of children within immigration court, and many others programs, including those that funded refugees and so many other populations.
Matias, we're seeing that immigrants are being demonized, not only just here in the United States, but also in Europe. What do you make of all of this?
What we're seeing is, again, the same kind of narrative that was implemented in Trump 1.0 that try to pit the immigrant community against each other by creating the good immigrant and the bad immigrant. That you might recall President Trump at the time stating that Mexico was sending rapists and criminals and so on. And that has become more prevalent in this new administration. But it also has expanded to all immigrants. And so what we saw in the first administration was a target of population by population. Mexico was one target, the Muslim ban was another one, and so on. In this Trump 2.0, we're seeing the attacks coming to all immigrants communities, all immigrants at the exact same time.
Thank you so much. Either of you can answer this next question. And Matthias, you hinted at it a little bit already. How are the federal cuts, funding cuts, both proposed and already taking place, how are these impacting undocumented communities in particular?
Undocumented communities? Want to go ahead, Matthias?
I can start, and then I'm sure you'll have more to add, Jesus. So what I can start with is that we are seeing the threat and the actual cuts already taking ground on local organizations, including Kids in Need of Defense, Immigrant Defenders, and so many other great organizations that are local to the Central Valley, but also across the state, providing legal services to folks. We're also seeing that the delay and the threat of Medicaid funding and Medicare funding has become a real concern for legislators at the state, because we don't know what that's going to look like when it comes to federal funding matching state funding, and programs that have been fought and won by immigrant communities like Health for All are almost becoming targets of whether or not they will be implemented to allow for the expansion of healthcare coverage for anybody who was not a U.S. citizen or resident in the state of California.
Yeah, to follow up briefly on what Matthias has mentioned, much of what Trump is doing at the federal level right now is very reminiscent of what Pete Wilson did with Prop 187, which was to try to deny immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, access to any type of public benefit. The problem with the current administration is that they're going beyond simply denying to also engage in unconstitutional measures like trying to deny citizenship, birthright citizenship. So they're going far beyond, but it's part of the process that we're seeing right now. And in terms of the population in the Central Valley, there are about, depending on the source that you utilize, there may be from 250,000 to 300,000 undocumented immigrants in the Central Valley. But what's very important to point out is that these undocumented immigrants in the Central Valley have been in this country on average of over 10 years, and they tend to be also part of what we call mixed status families. There are families that have multiple immigration status and that also have a migration tradition that goes all the way back to the late 19th century. The fundamental problem that exists in the United States is that it has not been able to pass any type of comprehensive immigration reform since 1986. So its immigration policies are always at odds with the labor market needs and with the economic needs. The economy expands, the labor market expands, but there is no opportunity for needed foreign labor of all types to arrive to the U.S. with visas, and that has been rejected, kicked down the street year after year after year by Congress and political leaders, and including executive branches.
Jesus, what are your current priorities when it comes to advocacy and legislative reform, either at the state or federal level?
Well, we have very limited engagement at the federal level by design, but other entities, other partner organizations are very actively involved at the federal level. We have, I think, at the state level in California, since the early 2000s, I think a state government that is far more responsive to the needs of all Californians. So what we're trying to ensure at the current moment is just to make sure that even if California is facing a difficult budget situations and fiscal situations, that California also continues to invest in different services that are vital to all families. And in our case, for example, that there is continued funding for immigration legal services provided by nonprofit agencies that, in the case of the Central Valley, there has always been underinvestment. It is a region that has received underinvestment, but we also want to ensure that California continues to invest, for example, in immigrant entrepreneurship programs that can explode the economy in the Central Valley if we also provide those opportunities for socioeconomic mobility of all Californians.
How about you, Matthias?
Thank you for that, Maria. What California Immigrant Policy Center is really focused on is uplifting a lot of the work that Jesus already alluded to. For example, that as a state, we move forward the way we did in 2016 to 2020, combating some of the Trump attacks by the administration by creating these great policies and changes to the law that allow for immigration inclusion. For example, one of the bigger focus that we have right now is AB 667, Economic Mobility for All, which is an expansion of the SEED program. It was a grant that focused on providing assistance to anybody wanting to open up a business, but it really allowed for undocumented immigrants to be able to do so through the utilization of their ITIN, their tax ID number. So they can launch a small business, or for those that have it, to continue to expand on that. Second, what we already saw at the state was leadership moving forward in creating a buffer of providing immigration support of $10 million that was allocated in the special election. And we know that is only an investment for what is needed. To briefly summarize, the state of California puts forth about $45 million in what's known as One California funding for immigration legal services, but we're focusing on asking the state to provide $60 million as an investment to provide equitable support to underserved regions like the Central Valley, Central Coast, Inland Empire. And lastly, we're also looking at the state to provide and guide in providing a response to keeping families together that is really a target of responsive to the elimination of the sensitive locations memo and policy of USCIS to allow for schools, churches, and other designated places to be protected.
Thank you so much. Our next question, either of you can answer briefly. This is from Leon Hoover of Fresno. He asks, how can just everyday people support undocumented individuals?
If I may, I'll begin, Matias, and then please chime in because you have a lot of really great info. I would say not just undocumented immigrants, but immigrants in general, because I think part of the problem that we're facing right now is this very aggressive anti-immigrant discourse that, as Matias pointed out in one of his interventions, is impacting all immigrants. And the immigrant families that we serve are mixed status families that have different types of situations. So we do have to try to impact that discourse. So part of what we can do as individuals, one is become engaged in those discussions in the public arena to try to stand up for America's tradition of being an immigrant nation, to reinforce the idea that immigrants from all parts of the world have come to the United States, made it a great nation, and continue to contribute to it, continue to contribute to California, to the Central Valley. That is a very important contribution. One of the things that we're also going to be trying to do, for example, with immigrant entrepreneurs, for example, is also trying to reinforce local campaigns to purchase and buy products with immigrant-owned businesses. And by immigrant-owned business, I mean from all over the world that are here in the Central Valley in Fresno. So we know how many great things they produce here, and it's something that we can also do to ensure that there is also a possibility for upward mobility for them and for their employees. That is a way in which we can also reinforce that economic contribution and economic social mobility of immigrants.
Matias, we received a few questions about DACA. You and I have been talking about it for a long time already. But Ada Jimenez and Victor Chavez from Fresno, they're wondering what movement is there on legislation for DACA recipients and those dreamers who are unable to access DACA, as well as the question of that, what is the legal status of DACA recipients? Many people don't know their legal status.
Yeah, and that's a great question from the audience, because as a DACA recipient myself, I'm very vigilant about what is going on in the ongoing battles of the courts, going back and forth on whether or not DACA is going to continue or not. So as of today, the last ruling that was provided by the Fifth Circuit stated that DACA can continue with the renewals and provided guidance to the Department of U.S. Homeland Security, USCIS, to state that they should be looking at processing first-time applications. However, the department has not moved forward in providing guidance at this time on whether or not they will follow up on that direction. The last case also divided, for Texas specifically, the deferred action, which is meaning that there will be no prosecution on the case, and the employment authorization card for folks in Texas only. The case went back to the local judge, Judge Hansen, who first heard the case and declared it unconstitutional, and stated that they will have to provide another hearing to follow up on those matters. It is the guidance of folks at this time that if anybody has DACA, to continue to renew it, to not let it lapse. You have to submit your renewal within 6 months or so, and follow up on that. And for those that may be looking to apply, first-time applicants, in the event you were to open, to please consult with an attorney and receive legal guidance or a DOJ accredited rep before moving forward with your application.
Thank you, Beth, so much for your insights and getting us started on this conversation, Jesus and Matias. Really appreciate your time today. In our next segment, Fresno Bee reporter Fernanda Galan and Carlos Virgen, senior editor of Modesto Bee, will take it away.
Okay, moving along, we will chat with Lázaro Salazar and Olga Grosh-Pratt, two immigration lawyers with a wealth of experience and knowledge in the Valley. But first, let me welcome my colleague, Carlos Virgen.
Thank you, Fernanda, and welcome everyone. I'm joining you from Modesto as the senior editor at the Modesto Bee. Okay, let's jump right into it. A lot of questions that we see and a lot of comments that we see are about immigrating the so-called the right way. Critics often comment when we report about immigration enforcement, saying things like, well, if they've been in the country for 15 or 20 years, why haven't they fixed their legal status, or why haven't they gotten their papers? Olga, can you explain the different pathways to legally immigrate to the U.S. and also maybe the pathways for U.S. citizenship?
Of course. There are various ways: through family, through employment, perhaps through humanitarian reasons, as whether an asylee or a refugee, or a victim of a crime or human trafficking. So those are some of the ways. But these are not accessible to everyone all the time. For example, there's this term politicians who are anti-immigration like to throw around about anchor babies, saying that, well, if you come here just to have kids here so you can get papers to those kids. However, for the last 28 years, the law has not allowed someone to get papers, to get lawful status in the United States, just because they have a U.S. citizen, son or daughter. That's not how it works. It often requires what is called a waiver of inadmissibility for somebody who entered illegally. And that is based on a different family member, a parent or a spouse who is a U.S. citizen or a resident. So unless you meet both criteria, you cannot get this waiver. And the only way a parent who has a child who was born in this country, if they entered illegally without documents, can become a resident and get a green card, is if they leave this country for 10 years and then continue the process abroad. So in terms of talking about dividing a family, separating parents from children, that is a very onerous, very difficult, demanding process. And also shows that the politicians who often use this term are unaware of how immigration truly works, that it's not enough to just send an application in. It's not enough to just pay money. That is not, unfortunately, how immigration works. It's a very demanding, stringent requirement, and that's just one example of how difficult and lengthy the process can be.
So this is for either of you. Is it your perspective that it's getting more difficult? It's obviously always been difficult, but you think it's becoming more difficult? For either one of you.
Okay, go ahead.
The administration has only been in place the second round just for 2 months. And yet we are already seeing some difficulties. For example, during the citizenship interview, it has all of a sudden become more frequent for the officers to ask nearly every single question on the citizenship form. Whereas before, it was up to the discretion of the officer, who can verify a person's background, can see, okay, you have no criminal record, you did things, let's call it the right way, you got your green card and everything was clean and ready. And I'm just going to ask, just confirm a couple of things with you and your address and confirm again that no criminal record. Okay, and we're good to go. And now we're seeing many officers starting to ask every single question on the form. And what it ends up being is an extra English test in a way. And this form for citizenship, for example, has a lot of strange words and that are very old and very archaic. And a lot of questions too about before 1933, or 1945, were you a Nazi? Most applicants weren't even alive then, but then the officers are still asking this question. So and a lot of these people have been working very hard to study English, and it may not be their first language, but they're studying. But now having to go through every single question, even though those that don't apply to them at all, and we're seeing that the discretion of the officers is being taken away. So that's just one example in the barrier that we're seeing right now in the last 2 months.
Lazaro, this one is for you. Can you walk us through the changes taking place under the Trump administration when it comes to immigration enforcement?
That's an excellent question. The enforcement is a huge movement that we see through the Trump administration. Now, locally, we saw a big movement starting in Kern County. There's a lot of people being detained. So there were a lot of people that were detained that had prior deportations, that had issues with prior serious convictions. And there were other people who had neither one of those two, but yet because of the mere fact that they were without status, they were being detained. So we have seen the initiation of the focus, the alleged focus of people with prior criminal convictions onto evolving to people having absolutely nothing. So it's gone on, it's moved from Kern County up through Fresno, and it's moving northward. We've seen that big drastic move. Now at a more national level, the news about the people being removed without their due process rights, without the opportunity to be heard as to whether or not the allegations that the government has proven forward are actually proved or provable. I'm talking about the people who have been removed to Venezuela under the guise that they were gang members, that they had crimes. And in fact, there's a lot of questions, concerns about the validity of that assertion that they were gang members, whether or not they had a conviction. But the bottom line here is due process is a big, obvious cornerstone of our Constitution, that all people, including undocumented people, have the right to confront the individual, here the government, who is alleging they don't have documents, that they have some kind of criminal history. But let's assume that there is a basis for the removal. There is a basis for the deportation. The law affords that individual an opportunity to present a defense. So maybe I have a U.S. citizen spouse, children, parents who are going to suffer an extreme hardship. And now the law allows me to, even though the government can establish deportability, the law allows me, the individual, to show the judge why I deserve to remain in the United States. That applies equally to people who have no status whatsoever and people who have legal permanent residency. And that's the key here. It's the attack, the complete disregard for due process that is a big concern, and it's something that we need to be on top of, be vigilant over, and constantly inform people, not only of their rights, how to exercise their rights, but start ahead of time before people are detained to do a full, complete analysis, review of their potential for deportation defense. Start getting those documents in order. Start getting that plan in effect now before they're detained, because again, the concern is the complete obliteration, overview of due process, which again is one of the cornerstones of our Constitution.
This one is for you, Olga. We often see false information that states being present in the United States is a crime. Is unauthorized immigration a criminal issue, or is it a civil issue?
Well, immigration is civil. It is it is created by Congress, the law of immigration. And the president, the executive branch, is the executor. They're supposed to carry it out and enforce it, but also, that's where the immigration policy comes from. So we have immigration law, which is Congress, and we have immigration policy, which is the executive branch, the president's decision of how to enforce it. What we are seeing, though, is that this administration has been, just in the last few days, a brand new development, has been planning to unearth some archaic laws, more than 50, 100, or even more, or even older, years old, to penalize in a criminal matter people who are here without documents or who will not cooperate with the registration that the government wants to enforce starting on April 11th. Now, we expect a lot of lawsuits regarding the validity of this registration requirement, as well as the criminal punishment for not complying with this registration. But the point that the Trump administration is heading that way is of great concern, because, again, immigration is civil law, but the administration is trying to criminalize it.
Thank you, Olga. And I'll stick with you and actually backtracking a little bit when we were talking about the difficulty of the legal immigration process. Can you talk a little bit about what the backlog is? What is the wait time that people are facing currently?
Sure. So these are some statistics that are published by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. It's right on their website at everyone's fingertips. And this pertains actually even before Trump took office. This is data as of the end of the 2024 fiscal year, which ended September 30th of 2024. So as of that day, immigration had a pending residency application. So these are people who are doing it legally, right? Who are applying for a green card, whether through family, through work, through the military as well. That was in September of 2024, more than 965,000. So that is close to 1 million people who are waiting for their residency applications to be processed by immigration. Now, in terms of citizenship, that number was 515,000. And then also, and those are just overall pending cases. Now, in terms of backlog, which is different from backlog. So backlog is officially defined by immigration that cases that should have been processed by the government but have not been. So this is not due to delay because the applicant is missing some document. These are cases that are ready to go but have not been adjudicated by immigration. So specifically for asylum seekers, the backlog was, again, this is as of September 2024, 1,140,000 cases. So these are cases that are ready to go and we're stuck. And then remember, I was talking about that 10 years abroad, if people don't qualify for a waiver based on a spouse or a parent with papers. Well, those waivers, those people who do qualify, who did submit it, the backlog is over 300,000 people. So these are people who qualify, who should be approved, but for a backlog in government have not gone. And or family petitions, backlog of family petitions, not overall pending, but backlog is nearly 500,000. So if I, a US citizen, want to do it right and apply for my husband, this family petition backlog is 500,000. So even though I'm doing it all right, it is taking so very long. And the total net backlog for all the people who are doing it right, who have the applications pending, overall with immigration, the backlog is 3.8 million. 3.8 million. So there you go. Is it hard? Yes, it is. And part of it, in addition to the difficulty of the laws, the anti-immigration policies, is that people who are doing it right, who are paying money to our federal government to be approved by them, are just sitting there for no reason at all. 3.8 million.
Thank you. Lázaro, I'm coming to you with just following up on what you mentioned earlier about how presumably these raids and immigration enforcements were supposedly targeted operations, and that they were targeting individuals with criminal offenders. But as we've seen throughout the country, we've seen many stories of everyday people with no criminal background being targeted and caught up in raids and deemed as collateral damage. What are you seeing in the Central Valley in terms of who is actually being targeted? Do you have any anecdotes that you could share with us?
Yes, unfortunately, there are people who are going to their pending court matter in one of the various court cases throughout the counties to attend a pending allegation. And instead of being able to attend the court hearing due process, they're being detained in the hallway, they're being detained outside the courthouse. And so by not showing up, that's called a failure to appear. That results in an outstanding arrest warrant. And so now those individuals have not only a state-ordered outstanding arrest warrant, but now they're in ICE custody. Again, these individuals that I've seen in the Valley have no prior convictions. They have a pending arrest or a pending matter that they need to address, and they're still being detained. So these are real life cases that are going on right now, people being detained at Golden State Annex that fall within this profile. Now, are there people that are being detained that have prior deportations? Correct. People who have prior convictions? Correct. But again, even those individuals have the right to due process and be in front of a judge and present their defense, and that is the key here. So yes, throughout the Valley, we have been seeing people being detained. Collateral damage, not so much when they're waiting for you outside the courthouse. That's not collateral damage, that's targeted. Now, how does ICE find out about that particular individual, about that particular hearing? It's a bit of a mystery. We can speculate. There's no point in that. The point is they are being targeted, they are being detained, and we have seen other people who are attending not only pending matters related to arrests, but also there are people who are going to family law matters, custody matters that ought to be concerned with regard to their status. What is going to happen to them outside of them, in the hallway, outside of the courthouse? These are critical questions that need to be addressed, that need to be of concern to the community, because there are people being detained who have no basis or should not be detained. Better yet, need to be afforded the opportunity to fight their case in front of a judge.
I wanted to ask both of you, Olga and Lázaro, why has it been so hard to pass federal immigration reform?
Well, that's $1 million question. I think part of the overall review of immigration reform includes two parties that want to take credit for getting that right reform across the finish line. Part of the problem is each and every time there's reform, you get politicians that are not backwards looking. And what I mean by that is if you have a system that is, let's say there's deficiencies in that system, there's problems in that system, it would make sense to fix those inadequacies, fix those problems, cure the defect. It's like you get a car that's put out on the market, but yet there are some defects. There's a recall, you fix the defects because you want to get the best car on the market. But instead of doing that, they come up with a whole new car. There's a whole new reform. There's a whole new program. And so now we have to start, in essence, from scratch. That's assuming that we can get the politicians to agree on some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. Part of the problem is when we get the politicians to agree to something that could be of benefit not only to the millions of people that are in the United States for many, many years, part of the community, tax-paying individuals, people who have kids, deep roots in the community, instead of dealing with the people that we have here, instead they come up with a whole new system, a whole new set of rules that we now have to, as lawyers, litigate in the court system to hope that we can get. And then it's an issue for the next Congress, for the next politician. That's my overall assessment. I mean, it's a really difficult question. I wish that we could go back to the days when Vicente Fox and President Bush were hand in hand waiting to do some immigration reform. Unfortunately, we all know 9/11 came around and that put a big damper on things. It would be nice for Congress to get together, talk about the reality of immigration reform, the people who are here who deserve some kind of resolution to their unlawful status, resolution to the fact that they have been paying taxes, resolution to continue to stay united as a family. That is what's something that is critically important. And I sincerely wish that Congress would do their best to focus on the betterment, not only of the community, but of this country.
Thank you, Lázaro. We've got a little bit less than 10 minutes. I think we've got enough time for at least 2 more questions. Olga, this one is for you. We got a question, a submitted question from Kenneth Martinson Gomez, and it's about workplace labor violations and immigration status. Can injured workers use their workers' compensation case to block a deportation or delay a deportation until they finish their case?
So there is a process that is a political process. So there is law. Remember at the beginning, we talked about how Congress makes the law, and you have the executive branch, which uses policy to execute that law. So there is a policy called deferred action. And that actually is, you may be familiar with deferred action through DACA. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And what it means is that these people are not, if they apply and they are approved, are not priority for deportation. Okay, doesn't mean they're not deportable at all. It means that they're not priority, kind of put on a back burner. And deferred action isn't new with DACA. It has been around forever. It is part of what we call prosecutorial discretion. So just like, if you're watching SVU or whatever on television, where a district attorney says that they offer a plea or can toughen up charges or lower charges on somebody, that's also what we can do, what ICE can do, is they can offer this prosecutorial discretion in the form of deferred action, that you are not a priority for deportation. And so this deferred action also exists for workers who are going through a wage dispute or safety standard violation reporting. And what it requires is a labor agency, usually of a state, so like the EEOC in California, to offer support in this case, and you would have to back it up with W-2s or whatever evidence there is of labor violations. And then you can then apply with the federal government for this deferred action. Now, this is not green card, this is not citizenship, nor is it forever. It's for a limited time. And that is to be determined by the federal government. Here's the problem. The problem is the current administration paused on almost all discretionary benefits. Okay, because remember we talked about that this is a policy, that this is not a requirement of law. And this administration has been speculating a lot, talking a lot about fraud and that people weren't properly vetted. And so a lot of discretionary benefits have stopped. So while if you still go on the USCIS website, this is still available and it walks you through the steps of how to apply and how to be approved. How long will it take and will it actually be approved is another question. And that is right now the hardest part of being an immigration lawyer, because we are so used to being, okay, this is the law. These are the facts of a case. We apply facts of the case to the law. But right now, so much is up in the air because the policies are being turned upside down, paused, or completely stopped in some cases. So it is hard for an attorney to say, I don't know. But a lot of that we are facing right now when it comes to discretionary benefits. So the short answer is yes, there is a benefit, but if you apply, how long will it take to get an approval? And will you actually get an approval is an unknown at this point.
Thank you. And Lázaro, maybe a quick response from you. We've got like 4 minutes left.
Yeah, just quickly, let's assume that the individual has a workers' comp case. Let's assume that the individual has a pending civil case. Let's assume that the individual has a federal court case and is physically outside the United States. There are mechanisms by which that we could involve both governments to get the individual to come in to do their testimony via deposition or to attend trial. Recall that I was putting emphasis on the concept of due process. It is one's due process rights to engage in, litigate in their rights afforded to them, whether it be workers' comp, whether it be state court or federal court. We've done that in terms of a deposition. We've done it in terms of a federal court trial where there was police brutality allegations going on. So even before they're sent out, assuming that they have to be sent out, there's still mechanisms by which the countries can work together and get the individual back into the United States.
Thank you.
This question is actually for the both of you, Lázaro and Olga. How is the Laken-Riley Act impacting your work as immigration lawyers? And if you could tell us more about that.
Olga, go ahead.
Well, clients are afraid. So if a client is accused of a crime and they didn't commit it, or whether they did and want to take responsibility for it and be a good member of their community, people are afraid to go to criminal court because, as Lázaro mentioned earlier, people have been detained and it is not known how they are found. So it is actually to a detriment of our community, because if there is any criminal matter, the community wants to hold that person accountable for the crime and give them a chance either to prove themselves innocent or to take responsibility and do the punishment that the judge or the jury require. So it does not help our community at all if people are afraid to go to court for any pending charges.
As far as court cases that I have in front right now, that has yet to be a court issue. Unfortunately, we do have people who are being detained, like I said before, who are going to court. Whether or not the government's going to allege Lincoln-Riley Act as a basis for the detention, whether or not they're going to argue that as a basis to deny bond, is yet to be seen. I have a bond hearing coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll see if that's what their allegation is. I doubt it, simply because the individual has a alcohol-related issue, nothing to do with burglary or theft or anything like that as outlined in the Lincoln-Riley Act, but it's entirely possible that the government may bring it up at that particular time. I haven't seen it so much recently, but I do expect it to be something that ICE will be using as a tool to detain people and to argue that the individual ought not to be given a bond, to allow the individual an opportunity to be released and fight the case, continue back with their family, work, provide for the family while they fight their deportation case. Remains to be seen, but I do fully expect it to be something quickly on the horizon.
Thank you so much, Lázaro.
Thank you both, Olga and Lázaro. Thank you for spending time with us this evening and sharing the information and the insight with us tonight. Again, much needed information, and we appreciate your time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Our next segment is presented by Eric Galicia of the Fresno Bee.
Thank you, Fernanda. Buenas tardes, everybody. My name is Eric Galicia, and I mostly cover Madera County for the Fresno Bee. And I'm going to be speaking to you about misinformation. If you're like me, you have probably seen a lot of it while scrolling on social media in the last few months. So I wanted to spend a few minutes just going over some tips that will help you cut through the lies, right? So let's start with some definitions. So there's malinformation. This is something that is based on fact, but it is taken out of context with the intention of misleading. And then we have disinformation, which I would call a straight up lie. It's false information created and spread to intentionally mislead and cause harm. And then there's misinformation, which is false information, but it is not necessarily created with the spread with the intention of misleading and causing harm. So here's an example of an outrageously false statement that I saw somebody make on Instagram yesterday. So obviously this comment, there's a lot of problematic statements made in it, but we're going to focus on the first sentence. It says, G, majority of the Black community voted for Trump. Now, I've seen this claim made multiple times. This specific comment was made in response to a post about the Trump administration's move to revoke immigration protections for a large number of people from certain Latin American countries, including Haiti. In reality, exit polls of the 2024 election show Trump made gains with the Black community, but more than 80% of the Black community voted for Kamala Harris. So I don't know who this person is. I blacked their name out because I don't want to put regular people on blast. But not knowing who they are, I can't tell you if they are simply spreading misinformation, meaning they don't have an intention of causing harm, or if they are spreading disinformation, meaning they are purposefully lying in order to cause harm, right? So I would say this is not malinformation because it is in no way based on any facts. Here's another misleading claim that spread like wildfire during the first week of the Trump administration. It was a Fox News host who first said that the Trump administration located 80,000 of the 300,000 migrant children who went missing during Joe Biden's presidency. As you can see, conservative pundits like Charlie Kirk took off with the claim, which was posted and reposted across social media. So, several fact checks on this claim by a number of organizations, including CBS and PolitiFact, determined that this claim was misleading, right? And that's because the claim mischaracterized an August 2024 report by the Department of Homeland Security, which ICE is a part of. So here is a shot of the summary of that report. So nowhere in this report are the words missing and lost ever used. The report says that 32,000 migrant children who arrived unaccompanied in the US failed to appear in court between 2019 and 2023. Let's not forget that 2 of those years were actually during Trump's first term. The report also says that ICE did not serve more than 291,000 of those children with notices to appear in court. So this is not to say that ICE's failure to monitor these children is not a huge problem, but this report is strictly about, ICE records, right? So it does not account for records of these children that might be held by non-enforcement agencies. So as the American Immigration Council told PolitiFact about this topic, this report reflects paperwork gaps, not lost children. So how do we cut through these lies and find out exactly what we're reading or hearing? Well, it's important to keep two important things in mind. Number one, be skeptical of whatever you come across. Number two, always verify the information, right? Especially be skeptical of claims that you see on the internet, on social media, when they don't cite any source. A lot of the time, finding the truth is as easy as typing a question into Google. And that's how I found out about the 2024 federal report about migrant children. So if it's fishy, Google it. But take notice of which outlets pop up in your Google search, look at their URLs, evaluate them, and find the credible news sources. That's us journalists. That's what we're here to do, to be credible news sources. So this is because it's our job to seek the truth and report it. We are not going to make things up and publish them. We are not going to share information that we have not checked. And we are not subject to any political party, regardless of what some people say on social media. So, look up our websites, right? The Fresno Bee, Sacramento Bee, Modesto Bee, Merced Sun Star. You can also look for national outlets that are dedicated to fact-checking claims, such as politifact.com, snopes.com, and factcheck.org. For fact checks in Spanish, there is factchequeando.com. And there are a number of other sources that adhere to journalism's code of ethics and have dedicated fact-checking services, including AP News, Politico, and many others. So here's what you shouldn't do. Obviously, don't believe everything you see on the internet. This includes images which can be manipulated, AI generated, or from events that are totally unrelated to whatever point the person who shared them is trying to make. Remember that AI image of Trump kissing Elon Musk's feet that greeted workers returning to the HUD building in Washington, D.C. last month? That's an example. And when it comes to breaking news, you should just realize that these stories cover what we know at the time that we publish them, right? So you should be on the lookout for updates and follow-ups instead of taking breaking news as the whole story. And whatever you do, I would ask that you please try not to share information on your social media accounts that has not been verified and fact-checked. So a lot of us at La Abeja, we had to spring into action to cover immigration when the Border Patrol carried out its enforcement operation in Kern County in January. And we were monitoring local social media accounts and groups, and we saw a huge surge in false reports by social media users of ICE and Border Patrol sightings all over the Central Valley. While she was reporting about the Kern County operation, my colleague, Melissa Montalvo, she verified that ICE did not take part in January's enforcement actions. We also learned that rumors that ICE would be showing up at a medical clinic here in Fresno were not true, but they had already been heavily circulated on social media. There were other rumors that said ICE was planning to show up and arrest people at local flea markets, right? So if you look at the screenshots here, there is the top left one is somebody who was saying that ICE was at Jensen and Highway 99 here in Fresno. The one below it talks about Clinica Sierra Vista. ICE was supposed to show up there and the clinic had to come out and dispute those rumors. In the middle, there's a post by the Madera Flea Market saying that the flea market is safe, ICE would not be showing up. And even in that post, somebody went in the comments and said ICE was at the flea market today, right? Which is not true. And then on the right, there are some photos of people saying that ICE was in Merced. So a number of people who share this information, they mean well, they want to warn their community, but just keep in mind that sharing false and unverified information can make the fear and panic that is already spreading through our communities even worse, right? So think like entering a theater and shouting fire after seeing what you think is a spark coming from the popcorn machine, right? That's what this is like. So instead of posting information about immigration sightings that you're not sure is accurate, we suggest calling the Rapid Response Network in your region and telling them if you have witnessed the presence of immigration agents in your community. These groups will send people out, they'll check out the scene, they'll document what they see, right? So in summary, just remember, be skeptical, verify using credible news sources, find your rapid response networks at ccijustice.org/CARRN. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will look into the rumors and the misinformation that floats around, and you can always reply to our Abeja newsletters with questions, and they will end up in the writer's inbox. So with that, I'd like to thank Lázaro, Olga, Matias, and Jesus for sharing their valuable insights on immigration with us. And thank you all for taking the time out of your evening for this very important conversation. Please stay in touch with the La Abeja team by subscribing to our free weekly newsletter, and make sure to follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at LaAbeja_CA. And let's keep this conversation going. If you learned something new from tonight's conversation, let us know. And if you can, please support local journalism with a subscription to power more conversations like this. With that, we'll close up. Have a great rest of your evening, and thank you for joining us.